two patriots, Greg Phillips and Catherine Englebrecht, and they've been at this for a long time, this whole thing of voter integrity. Catherine started as one of the Tea Party leaders. I think the King Street Tea Party down in Houston, Texas. I think I spoke at one of her very first events in 2009. It was before the 2010 Tea Party revolt that, we won 63 seats that year. Catherine's been at this for over a decade, and as good a person and tough a person as you can find. And Greg is just another rock star. They're in prison right now. Catherine Englebrecht is in prison. I think this is day 6 or 7 on a story of which they actually have worked on and broke about the information and data of poll workers and poll watchers that have been taken by the Chinese Communist Party. They laid this out at a meeting in Arizona a couple of months ago. The New York Times then did a story about, I think, 3 weeks ago, of which they mocked and ridiculed them as conspiracy theorists and a collection of wingnuts. But they were the people that really were in back of 2,000 Mules. Dinesh was the filmmaker, but they really did all the analysis and all the assessment. And the New York Times just eviscerated them. And then the next day, the Chinese individual associated with the company was arrested by, I think, an LA prosecutor in LA. Why? For exactly what they said, taking this information and putting it on servers in China that the CCP essentially could control. And as you know, we're the biggest anti-CCP show and platform in the world. That's one of the reasons we have such a massive audience of Lao Beijing, of the Chinese people. And I give interviews every week on these Chinese TV networks that are from the expats in China that blow back into mainland China. Catherine Englebrecht and Greg Phillips called this. Catherine Englebrecht and Greg Phillips were working with the FBI. They were working with the field offices of the FBI because this was as they said, this was a national security problem. Not just about the vote itself, but the sharing of information about actual American citizens with the CCP. Brian Glicklick did a great job on Tucker last night. If we got that, we may play the entire thing. Brian, thank you for joining us. You're the spokesman for True the Vote. Just make sure our audience understands. I mean, I've seen, look, not that, they're always trying to throw me in prison one way or the other. They're always trying to throw President Trump into prison. And, James O'Keefe and everybody, everybody's in this movement they're out to get. But on this one, brother, I got to tell you, this is so blatant. This is so in your face that they've taken Catherine Englebrecht and Greg Phillips of stepping up and working with the appropriate authorities to defend their country and defend their countrymen of every political party, not just MAGA, not just Republicans. They are rotting right now in a Texas prison. Can you walk us through exactly what happened and how this outrage is continuing?
Absolutely, and thanks. What's most shocking about this is that they are imprisoned in a civil proceeding. It's not even a criminal proceeding. To set the table for this, in January of 2021, almost 2 years ago, Catherine and Greg became aware of this information about an election technology company called Conic. They were shown in a hotel room. Actually, I should say Greg was shown in a hotel room information that was from Conic that was being stored in China. Now, this was against the agreements that Conic had all over the United States with different voting entities, which called for Conic data to be stored solely in the United States. So this was obviously a threat to national security, and it was a threat to the security of all the people, over 1 million people whose data was out there, because it included things like social security numbers, bank accounts, home addresses, and so on. So they brought this to the FBI, and the FBI spent months stringing them along. They also started bringing it to other law enforcement authorities. Subsequently, this summer, they had the event that you referred to in Arizona, where they discussed this in public for the first time. And as a result of that, Conic, the company behind all of this, sued them for defamation in a Texas court. And when they sued them, they sought a restraining order ex parte, meaning that Catherine and Greg were not aware of the proceeding or allowed to present their information. And the judge blindly issued word for word the restraining order that Conic's attorneys requested. Subsequent to that, part of the restraining order calls for Greg and Catherine to identify anyone who had accessed the protected data. Now, Catherine and Greg never saw the data being accessed. They saw a presentation about the data, but it was not being accessed, and they don't know who did it. And they refused to identify the people who showed them this information. And when they refused to do it to the court, the judge threw them in jail for an indefinite period of time until they came forth with the identity of these individuals. Now, the last point I'd make about this is that Catherine and Greg have appealed this federal judge's decision to the Fifth Circuit Court, which is in New Orleans. The Fifth Circuit Court, in under 24 hours, issued an order to Connick's attorney to show cause by 5 p.m. today why they should continue to be imprisoned. And so there's at least a possibility that this nightmare is going to end soon for them, but we'll have to see. When it comes to the courts, we have no idea.
Brian, hang on a second. Has anybody, to your research, has anybody in the history of this nation ever been imprisoned in a defamation suit? I'm unaware of anyone ever being imprisoned in a defamation suit. The court papers in the Fifth Circuit charge this as being an abuse of the judge's discretion. And if you look at the transcript notes from the hearings he held, it's not hard to see why that claim is made. He denied Catherine and Greg multiple opportunities to offer testimony as to why their actions are not bound by the restraining order. He made judgments from the bench in open court that many people would say indicated that he had predetermined his feelings about this. He said to Catherine and Greg's attorney in open court that he thought that attorney was being played by Catherine and Greg. It's shocking, and I've never seen anything quite like it. I want to go to the bigger issue. By the way, we're going to figure out how to support you guys to get Catherine and Greg out of prison, because this is outrageous, and it's clearly being sent as a message before Election Day that if you get out of line, you're going to go to prison too. Okay, but I want to go back to the bigger issue. Greg Phillips and Catherine Englebrecht, and first off, their work on 2,000 Mules was absolutely brilliant. There's no doubt about it. And in fact, all these groups that come together to watch the boxes, you notice that people are on notice that, hey, if you're going to do ballot harvesting, you're going to have a set of eyeballs on you now. And I think that's really going to stop a lot of the ballot harvesting. Why? Because of the work of Greg Phillips and Catherine Englebrecht. In this situation here with Connick, they understood immediately, because they're very sophisticated people, that this was a massive national security issue directly related to the existential threat that is the Chinese Communist Party. Remember, the establishment always wants to do the misdirection play on Russia. And the Russians, the KGB guys and FSB guys that run that are as bad as anybody in the world. But they've got an economy the size of New York State, demographic death spiral. They are not an existential threat to this country. The Chinese Communist Party is an existential threat to the Chinese people, to Lao Beijing, and to this nation and her citizens. Greg Phillips and Catherine Englebrecht knew that. They went to the appropriate authorities. You said something very disturbing there. You said they were played along or tapped along by the FBI field offices. Give us, because this is actually the bigger issue. Once we get them out of prison for this ridiculous imprisonment on a defamation charge, we then have to deal with the thing itself. And that is why the Garland and Wray and the Biden regime did not take this seriously and played these people along for over a year when they were presented this information. How did that happen? And how did this, because that is grounds for impeachment of Wray and Garland, at least. And this is going to come up. This thing's not going to go away. Tell us exactly what you mean that they were played by the FBI.
When Catherine and Greg were shown this information, they brought it to the FBI field office that serves the area where Connick is headquartered, which is in Michigan, and they initiated a communication process. They arranged to have all of the data, which is 350 terabytes of data, turned over to the FBI. They started a months-long communication with them about how the data was sourced, what it showed, the open source tools that were used to locate it in China, how the domain names that Connick was using to service these elections around the country were actually leading to servers that were in China, and anyone who took the time to look could see it. The FBI, for months, played them along with communications, mostly by text message, many of which Catherine has already filed with the court to demonstrate that they actually happened. At one point, after months of this, she was told that the matter had been handed off to the FBI in Washington, whereupon they cut off all communication and were never heard from again. At one point in that process, right before the communication ended, she received indications that the FBI was starting to look at this not from the standpoint of the national security threat and the data itself, but as a cyber theft investigation targeting True the Vote, Catherine.
Okay. When they came up on the there's no harder anti-CCP effort than the war room. That is known globally. I'm the only, I believe, American citizen in the history of this republic to be fully sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party, of which the Biden administration never even gave a peep, never said anything about that. I don't mind that. I can live with that because the CCP is going to come down. Remember, in the book by Rogan from the Washington Post, they talked about inside the Trump administration, you had the hardliners, you had the realists, and then you had a group called the Superhawks, and that was led by me, Stephen K. Bannon. And because the Superhawks have a different theory of the case, we do not believe and will never accept the fact that the Chinese Communist Party is the legitimate ruler of the Chinese people, and the Chinese people agree with that. Lao Beijing. They must be taken down. And the FBI is infiltrated. This is a perfect example. When Merrick Garland and these guys got up last week with the big press conference, they had Marino and they had Ray. They're talking about Grandoons. That's a misdirection play. What they're talking about on the Huawei case, yes, it's important. I made a film on Huawei two years ago with the people at Epic Times. Yes, it's important, but it's Grandoonville. The infiltration of our nation by influence peddling by the Chinese Communist Party is seen not just by Hunter Biden, but a whole raft of things. Why did this go to Maine FBI? When Greg Phillips and Catherine Englebrecht had the information, were working with the appropriate field office, as soon as it went to the Maine FBI, it's dropped as a national security measure and looked as, maybe some cybersecurity thing. The FBI, Ray's got to be fired immediately, and we are going to get to the bottom come the new Congress in this Chinese Communist Party infiltration into the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There is something that sticks to high heaven. We are inundated in this nation with their influence peddling, okay? Everybody knows, it's an open secret, and nothing ever happens. When the FBI ever does anything, it's these little marginal cases with a college professor here or some mid-level tech executive here. No, those are all misdirection plays. And Garland, you something like a big man with your big press conference and address to the nation on national security. Well, about 2 Grundoons were associated with Huawei. And you got Greg Phillips and you've got Catherine Englebrecht rotting in a Texas prison right now. This is a disgrace. That judge, we're going to get that judge thrown off the bench, and we're coming for Ray, and we're coming for Garland. And I don't care if the mainstream media likes it or doesn't like it. I don't care if the FBI, the DOJ like it or don't like it. Brian, stick around. We're going to take a short commercial break. Brian Glicklick from True the Vote, the spokesman for Catherine Englebrecht and Greg Phillips.